He hadn't touched a woman in 12 years, and now the first one to fall into his arms was nearly destroyed. James Coulter didn't expect much from life any more. He lived quiet, alone up in those dry Arizona hills with nothing but the wind and the weight of memories he never talked about. He had a cabin, a shotgun, and regrets older than the trees around him. But that day everything changed. She came stumbling out of the tree like death, was riding her heels, barefoot, filthy, barely wrapped in a piece of white cloth that used to be a curtain or maybe a dress. Her arms were scraped raw, her lips were cracked, her eyes, well, they looked like they'd seen things no one should ever see. She collapsed right in front of him. No scream, no name, just two whispered words as she clutched that filthy cloth to her chest. "Please don't." He froze. She wasn't bleeding much on the outside, but her body trembled like she'd just crawled out of a burning house. He took a step forward. She winced, but didn't pull away. That's when the cloth slipped just a little, and what he saw made his stomach twist. Her back looked like someone had tried to brand her with fire and shame. Burns, welts, deep twisted scars, and shapes that didn't belong on human skin. Symbols, letters, like someone had tried to write their name into her pain. James stumbled back. It wasn't the blood, it wasn't the wounds. It was the way she curled into herself like she'd learned to disappear. And for a moment all he could see was Tennessee, the war, the girl he couldn't save. The one who looked at him with the same broken stare. He'd walked away once. He'd sworn never again. He took off his coat, slow and steady, and wrapped it around her like a promise. No words, no questions, just action. Then he picked her up and carried her away from whatever hell she'd come from. And for the first time in a very long time he felt alive. He thought the worst had passed. He had no idea the real storm was only just coming. The cabin was warm, but up in those hills the night air still had a bite to it. It wasn't freezing, but after what she'd been through, even a summer breeze might have felt like ice on her skin. He laid her down gently on the old cot by the back wall. She didn't speak, didn't even try to cover herself up any more than she already was, just curled into herself, holding on to that coat he'd wrapped around her like it was stitched from safety. James didn't ask question. He didn't want to spook her, and truth be told, he wouldn't have known where to start. So he did what men like him do when words feel like too much. He built a small fire in the stove, not because it was cold, but because the sound of it crackling gave the place a heartbeat. She didn't move much. Her eyes just scanned the cabin like she was expecting someone to burst through the door. Every noise outside made her flinch. Even the wind brushing against the shutters seemed to rattle her bones. James made coffee. It was bitter, strong, and older than he'd like to admit, but it gave his hands something to do. He sat at the table, watching the fire, sneaking glances toward her now and then, still breathing, still silent. But something about the way she gripped that coat told him she hadn't given up completely. Later that night, she stirred just slightly. Her head turned, her eyes found his for a heartbeat. No words, no emotion, just connection. A flicker of something human buried deep under all that pain. He nodded like a man who'd been in trenches before and knew when not to speak. And she turned her head back toward the wall. The next morning, she whispered her first word. Water. He handed her a cup, slow and careful. No sudden moves. She drank in silence, then looked at him a little longer than before. And that look, it didn't ask for help. It didn't thank him. It just said one thing. I'm still here. What James didn't know yet was this. That single word, that one sip of water would set off a chain of events that no fire, no shotgun, and no amount of silence could ever stop. She didn't talk much that next day. Just short answers, nods, a few careful glances like she was still trying to figure out if he was real or just another trick of a cruel world. But later that afternoon, while he was whittling down a broken chair leg out on the porch, she stepped outside and sat on the steps beside him. Didn't say a word at first, just stared off into the trees, then, almost like she was talking to herself, she said it. They used to make me clean their boot. James kept carving, didn't flinch, just nodded. Slow, Ellie kept going. Said there was a mining camp not far off, not official, not on any map. A place where they worked people to the bone and punished them when they broke. She'd run twice. First time they broke her nose. Second time they carved her back up like a piece of rawhide. He didn't ask how she got out the third time. He figured that was a story best told on a stronger day. But just as the sun started to fall behind the pines, James heard something that stopped him cold. Hoof beats fast, coming up the ridge road. He stood, grabbed his shotgun, motioned Ellie inside. She froze, then moved like she'd been trained for moments just like this. The man who rode up didn't look like a cowboy. He looked like a drunk banker who lost his watch and blamed the waitress. Fancy vest, greasy mustache that couldn't hide the cruelty behind them. He called her by name. Ellie rose. You got one chance to come back quiet. James stepped down off the porch. She's not going anywhere. The man smirked. Ain't up to you, old timer. James cocked the shotgun, not aimed, just enough to remind the man this wasn't some city street. This was his land. The man didn't draw, just spat into the dirt, turned his horse, and rode off. But that look in his eyes on the way out said Dad one thing clear, he'd be back, and he wouldn't be alone. James didn't say a word for a long while after. Just sat there, shotgun across his lap, staring into the trees. Later that night, he scribbled a note to an old friend who carried a badge just in case. If you're still here listening to this, I'd say you're just like James. You want to know what comes next, and trust me, you'll want to be around for it. So if you haven't already, now's a good time to hit that subscribe button because the real fight hasn't even started yet. 3 days passed at our quiet ones, but the kind of quiet that ain't peaceful. The kind where even the wind feels like it's waiting for something. James stayed close. He didn't say it, but Ellie knew he was keeping watch. He didn't cut wood, didn't check traps, just cleaned that shotgun like it was Sunday morning and the world was about to go to hell. Then it happened. Late afternoon, the air got still. No birds, no bugs, just the sound of hooves and dust rising on the ridge road. 3 riders, not ranchers, not law. They rode like they didn't need to ask permission. James stood in the doorway, Ellie behind him, holding her breath. One of the men was the same one who'd come days before. This time he didn't come to talk. He raised his voice. Step aside, old man. James didn't. The second rider shifted in his saddle, hand drifting too close to his belt. James didn't wait. He fired. The man yelped, dropped like a sack of grain, leg pouring blood. The other 2 froze, didn't run, but they didn't move either. That's when another voice came in, calm, steady, worn like leather. I'd think real hard about your next move. From the tree a man stepped out, badge on his chest, rifle slung low. Abram Hale, James's old war buddy, now sheriff of the whole damn territory. Abram looked each of them in the eye. This here's my jurisdiction, and she's under my protection now. The wounded one groaned. His friend cursed under his breath, but none of them reached for their guns again. They left slow, but they left. Later, James asked Abram how he knew to come. Abram smiled. You send a note that smells like gunpowder and regret. I figure it's serious. And if you think that's the last time these men will cross paths, you might want to stick around 'cause some stories don't end in gunfire. They just begin there. The dust settled. The cabin was quiet again, but not like before. Not heavy, not haunted, just quiet in a way that let a man hear his own breathing and not hate it. Ellie didn't hide any more. She still flinched at loud noises, still woke up sweating some nights, but now she sat at the table in the morning. She drank her coffee slow. She helped gather firewood, asked questions about the stove, little things, but little things mean something when you've come back from the edge. James noticed it, too, the way she looked out the window longer each morning. The way she once laughed barely a breath, but it was there, and how he didn't know what to do with it. He wasn't sure if he was fixing her or she was fixing him. Maybe it didn't matter. One evening she brought in a basket of wild flowers and set them by the window. He didn't say anything, but the next day he swept the porch clean for the first time in years. They didn't talk about love, didn't call it anything at all. But one night, over stew and black coffee, she looked up and asked, "You ever think some folks were put here not to save others, but to give them space to save themselves?" James didn't answer, just nodded. Because if he'd opened his mouth, the wrong words might have come out, and that's how it went. Two people, a cabin, a slow healing that didn't need permission or explanation. But here's the thing, how many folks like Ellie are still out there right now? How many Jameses are sitting alone thinking their story is done? Sometimes all it takes is one decision, one act of kindness, one moment of not walking away. So, let me ask you something. Who are you in this story? Are you the one running or the one who stands still and opens the door? If this story meant something to you, give it a like, maybe share it, maybe let it sit with you a while. And if you want to hear more stories like this, real ones, rough ones, the kind that stay with you, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. 'Cause out here in the West, stories don't end. They just keep riding